I'm Vernita Wesley, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's Kids Zone. Today, as we continue our Unit 1 study entitled Faithful Prophet, we are going to be looking at lesson number 2 from the Young Adult Studies entitled Making Wise Choices. Our devotional reading is from Hebrews 11th chapter, Hebrews 11th chapter, the 23rd through the 31st verse. The background scripture comes from Joshua 5th chapter, verse 13 through 6th chapter, verse 27. The print passage is from Joshua the 5th chapter, verse 13 through 15, the 6th chapter, verse 1 through 5, verse 15 through 16, and verse 20. Our key verse is taken from Joshua the 6th chapter and the 2nd verse. I'm going to read the NIV version. The Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men." As I said, that's Joshua 6th chapter, verse number 2, the NIV version. Now, the lesson aims, as a result of experience in this lesson, we should be able to do these three things. Number one, explain how Joshua acted obediently to the vision from God. Number two, reflect on our inefficiencies when challenges overwhelm us. And number three, commit to obeying God, especially in challenging times. Okay? Now, to give an overview of this week's lesson, let's see. The setting of this lesson is Jericho. God had appointed Joshua as Moses' successor as leader of the Israelites. Joshua had led the Israelites across the Jordan River, where they settled temporarily in an encampment at Gilgal. Okay, at Gilgal, the men of Israel were circumcised, thereby renewing their commitment to God. After celebrating Passover, the angelic commander of the Lord's army appeared to Joshua. Okay. The commander gave Joshua instructions for the battle at Jericho and encouragement for the victory. Now, we are all familiar, with this scripture, with the story, pretty much, of the battle of Jericho. There's even an old Negro spiritual called where the lyrics say Joshua fit the battle at Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. That's some of the lyrics. I don't know the whole song. If I did, I'd sing it for you. But anyway, that's the historical background of it for us. Now, the scripture from the NIV version of Joshua the 5th chapter, verse 13 through 16 reads, "Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up and asked him, 'Are you for us or for our enemies?' Neither, he replied, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does the Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Now, just as the Lord had commanded Moses at the burning bush, which is found in Exodus chapter 3 and 5, Joshua was obedient to God's instruction. He surrendered his will to God's will, and he humbled himself and stepped aside and trusted God for the victory. As we go on through the lesson, we're in Joshua chapter 6, verse 1 through 5. Also, I'm going to read that from the NIV version. "Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpet. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpet, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the walls of the city will collapse, and the army will go up, everyone straight in. Now, as the scripture said, Jericho was a fortified city. These people were afraid because the reputation of the Israelites was already there. They knew what was going on. And we also know that the Canaanite people, they were a wicked kind of people. They didn't believe in God. They didn't believe in this God. They had their own God that they worship and they serve. It was an idol God. And not only did they worship this idol God, but they sacrificed their babies. And this was the type of thing that God didn't tolerate. He knew that they were wicked people, and his plan was to destroy them. And also, we like to note that Canaan, that was the door, that was the first city of the promised land, which God had promised to the Israelites, before they left Egypt. And this was their doorway into the promised land. So the Canaanites had to be destroyed in order for the Israelites to take control and take possession of that land. Now, as we move on to Joshua chapter 6, verse 15, 16, and 20, I'm also going to read that from the NIV version. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." And verse 20 says, when the trumpet sounded, the army shouted at the sound of the trumpet. When the men gave a loud shout, the walls collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. Now, you may think like this plan is very specific, march around the city 6 days, one time every 6, for 6 days, one time march around the walls, march around the cities. And then, you had the possession. It had to be in a specific order, with the priest and, the horns, and everybody had their own. It was like a parade, but everybody had their own place in the possession. So the plan was very specific. Now, we have to think to ourselves, if God was giving us a plan and he wanted us to do something and do it in a specific order, would we be wise enough, would we pay attention enough so that we could do what he asked us to do in that exact order? Or would we halfway listen, like our children do when we tell them to do something? They kind of halfway listen, and they may do part of the thing and not, the other, or then they may inject their own understanding or their own little way into doing it and not complete the task exactly the way that it was the instruction was given to them. But when we're doing God's work, we have to do it God's way. That's an important thing. That's what obedience is. Not haphazardly doing something, but to do that thing exactly the way it was asked that you do it. Giving up your will for the will of the Lord. That's what we have to do. So, we may think that God's plans and his instructions are kind of, odd or maybe whatever, but what it is that they are way higher than what we can possibly think at times, because that's what our God is. He's a high God. He's not like us. He doesn't think like us. He is not like us. He's holy, and we're not. So, and his plans never, ever, ever fail, and they never will. So what we have to do is just to be obedient to him and to do the things that he asked us to do. And that was one of the reasons why the Israelites wandered in the wilderness for the 40 years, is because they were not obedient to what he asked them to do. They didn't follow his ordinances, those things that he asked them to do on a daily basis. Then they wanted to turn back, they just were mumbling all the time. So, it was just always just one thing after the other. They were typical people, and this is what he wants us to discipline ourselves and just to do the things that he would ask us to do. Okay, so as we continue, with this lesson, after the walls had come down and Joshua, took control of the city, the one note that that's important for us to recognize is the conquering of the Canaanite city of Jericho is referenced in the phrase took the city, which is found in verse 20. Okay, and which is the doorway to Canaan, just as I said, which is the promised land. And the only people that were spared in that city was Rahab and her family because, she was a spy. She had worked on behalf of the people of Israel. Okay, and also the articles of silver, gold, bronze, and iron for the sacred treasury. Those were spared too. And God commanded Israel to destroy everything else in the city except those specific things. Now Joshua was completely he obeyed God to the letter. He did exactly what it was that God told him to do. So now in your life you're gonna encounter battles, but the thing to remember is that the battle is not yours. It belongs to the Lord. And he's going to fight it. All we have to do is just turn it over to him. We just have to yield to him, which means that we have to step back and let him do what it is that he has already planned, for us, because he has specific instructions for our life. He knows what it is he wants us to do. And it's our job is just to be obedient to him and to yield to his will. Let our will be his will, not the other way around. So that is the close of our lesson for today. And it's just to allow ourselves to be in the will of God and to yield to him. And that's the best decision that we can make. That's what making good choices is all about, is to choose God's way and to choose his will. So as you go through your day, through your week, we hope that you take the lesson from this lesson, take the high points from this lesson and carry them on and incorporate them into your daily life. Just remember, no matter what we face, the battle is not ours. It belongs to the Lord. So God bless you and he keep you, and we'll see you next time.